All right. Hello, Bad Faith YouTube. I thought to myself, there's been a lot of discourse on the internet. A lot of people have lots of thoughts and feelings and questions, and we have been addressing them and working through them over on the Callin app. But I figured I should go ahead and address the YouTube audience since I know there are a lot of people here who haven't quite found their way over to Callin. As a refresher, it's an app that kind of works like Clubhouse. You download it to your phone. It's both Android and Apple, and it allows you to call in and ask me questions directly. I put a link in the description of this video where you can call in and ask me questions. Right now, there is already a queue that is formed, and I will start taking those questions shortly. And then at 8, we're going to go over to being exclusively on Callin, and there's a separate link there for that. The show is called The Debrief, Debrief, as in me, Bree. It's in the middle of the word debrief, which I continue to find to be really hilarious, although I accept that I am perhaps the only one. Let's see how this format works. If people like this, great. If people don't, that's fine too. Let's start by watching a brief clip from the episode, as I want to do to contextualize people. This week's episode of Bad Faith, I interviewed Amy Vilela, who is running for Congress in Nevada's 1st District. You might know her from the Netflix documentary Burning Down the House that introduced us to a lot of progressive favorites like AOC and Cori Bush. Of course, AOC was the only one in that cycle that won her race, but Cori Bush tried it again and got into Congress, and Amy Vilela is hoping for the same. She was a Bernie surrogate. She has a very powerful personal story as to why she's so committed to Medicare for all. Her daughter very tragically died as a consequence of discrimination against people who have no insurance. She believes she was sent home because she was uninsured, and they didn't pay attention to all of the very clear warning signs that she had a blood clot in her leg, and additionally some medical discrimination against her daughter as a Black woman. She tells that story really powerfully on the podcast. You can listen to the full episode at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. But we also put a, I think, 20-minute clip of, I think, the most politically relevant segment toward the end of the episode up on Bad Faith YouTube. So make sure you subscribe and all of those things so that you don't miss when we put premium content up for everybody's consumption. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen so we can watch a little bit of that, and then we can discuss. So sit tight, people in the queue. I'm going to take your questions in 1 second. And here we go. I'm going to just quickly pull up this clip. And let's see what you guys think about this. You on is not at all about your commitment. It's this fundamental question that people are pondering, which is commitment enough, when we've now seen over the last 4 years a demonstration of how good the establishment is at undermining even those people that have the best values and the deepest personal commitments to their ideals.
Mm-hmm. Again, I can understand the frustration, and when it comes down to electoral politics, we're talking about, a very small handful of people versus how many people are, in Congress. And to me, it's not either or, it's got to be both. We have to, I go back to this again, we have to increase the power of the people that are there, the numbers, and start gaining some of that power, have enough that if you vote away, that, you will get, some pushback, blowback on, do you have enough votes to actually stop the legislation?
Well, yes, that's the whole point, that the squad members, because of the narrow margins in the House, could have stopped anything. They could have held up Biden's agenda as completely as Manchin and Sinema could have. Not in every instance, because there were some cases where Nancy got some Republicans to cross the line. But for things that I would argue Republicans were very unlikely because of political blowback to vote for, like a Republican was not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi to become Speaker of the House. You know, I mean,
You
if they
never
did,
know.
I would love to see that happen and let that person then suffer the electoral consequences. And maybe that's an opportunity for a Democrat to get that seat, right? But you don't get those kind of opportunities unless you force people into those situations. All right. So, am I fair? Is that kind of litmus test question that I've been asking all of the candidates to answer when they come on Bad Faith? And I tell them in advance, you know, this is what the interview is going to be like. This is the kind of thing I have to ask because I know my audience wants to know the answer to these questions and your ability to fundraise and really get people to invest in electoral politics. You know, the full Bernie coalition to reinvest in electoral politics kind of depends on these answers. I want to know from you what you think. Thomas, you were the first one up. Unmute yourself and let us know what's on your mind this evening.
Hi. Thanks for doing this. I think there's a sort of deeper question here that I think gets to one of the fundamental ideas of Marxism, which is no matter how good a person these candidates might be, no matter how devoted they may be to a certain cause, in the absence of an independent proletarian party for socialism, they will not be able to achieve the things that they want, that they at least are saying now that they want to achieve, nor will they even be able to see the way to achieve it in the absence of that. Right?
I mean, yes, obviously there are a lot of people who feel that way, that there's no doing anything within the Democratic Party, and that it would be obvious to people who were even anticipating or contemplating a run that that's the case if they had a different kind of analysis. I do believe, however, that there are people on the left who don't quite feel that way. I do believe there's a cohort who, if they had heard Amy articulate a strategic approach for being more adversarial, even within the Democratic Party, would have been encouraged and potentially would have supported her run, even if they understood it to be a long shot. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's right. I think that's most of the left, actually.
So, yeah,
which
go
I
ahead.
think is a problem. I think it's a problem.
Say
I think
more.
I think it's a sign of the regression of the left, right? That's something that would have seemed very obvious to your average person in the left, like in the late 19th century, is now maybe almost like a critical insight, or maybe even worse, something that can be dismissed.
Okay, well, I mean, I hear you, Thomas, but I think, and that's perfectly legitimate. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you other than I'm curious about getting down to brass tacks about this question of, for those people who still, either because they believe a third party is still some years out, whether it's because they have a personal investment or affinity, affection for some of these candidates who we've known through, you know, several election cycles now, who have committed themselves to the Bernie campaign the same way we committed ourselves to the Bernie campaign, for better or for worse, still are rooting for people and perhaps hoping against hope that they can be successful or at least achieve some ends. One of those ends perhaps being highlighting the contrast that would help people understand the need for an alternative party. I think that there were still a lot of people who would be invested if they heard Amy say a certain thing. And I'm curious what you make of that and what kinds of words would make an impression on you, if any.
Yeah, I may be the wrong person to ask on this because there's not any that would.
Fair enough. Fair
yeah.
enough. Well, I appreciate you calling in, Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay, Anthony, you're up next. What do you make of it all?
Oh yeah, what's up? What's up? Well, I mean, first off, I was thinking I really don't know the difference between liberal and progressive at this point in time. I couldn't tell you. Could you
Really,
tell me?
Anthony? Well, tell me a little bit about yourself first. How do you identify?
Well, I thought I was progressive, and after Bernie, the squad, COVID, and Ukraine, I never want to be called a progressive. That's no, never.
Mm.
I will never associate. I will never. If that label will turn me away from anyone who uses it. I mean, it's just terrible. It really is.
How do you feel about
I mean,
leftist these days?
It's fine, but it's mostly just like people trying to define a clique online. But no, I feel like the term's fine. I'm consider myself on the left, if anywhere, but that's, I mean, the when the litmus test comes up, I don't really know what the test is, because if I was going to do a litmus test, I'd just do real rapid fire, like, are you voting for Pelosi? Yes or no? How about the CARES Act? Are we getting a voice vote or a recorded vote? Like yes or no? Like just real rapid fire kind of stuff that I've already made up my mind on. And or how about George Bush? He's a war criminal. Yeah, everyone can say that, but Obama, is he a war criminal? Yes or no? Like real rapid fire. And I mean, no Ukraine. Would you have voted for 40 billion? Yes or no? Like, and
yeah. What do you think
they're gonna
about
fail.
what do you think about this argument that there are folks? I think that maybe Marianne Williamson hinted at this and talked about this in a conversation with Andrew Yang she had on his podcast, that there's a version of a Democratic candidate, in her case, a potential presidential candidate, that says, I will play by your rules upon a certain condition, that condition being that you don't try to attack me the way that there were these coordinated attacks in the Democratic Party against Bernie Sanders. And that a condition of playing ball in that way, hear me out hypothetically, is to say, I'm going to not be, I know internally that if you disrespect me, if you cross that line, I'm going to go ahead and run as a third party candidate. I'm going to be more openly adversarial and hostile, et cetera. But while I'm still in this district that might not be as blue as I'd like it to be, not be as progressive as I'd like it to be, I'm going to keep my head down a little bit so I don't get blown away by the millions and millions of dollars that are now coming in from DMFI and from AIPAC, the way that we saw used against Senator Turner and Summerlee, although remarkably Summerlee was able to overcome. What do you say to a candidate that says, okay, like I'm totally with you, but I just got to keep my head down to get in there? And if I can't get in there, or if they betray me, then all bets are off.
Well, I'm not even with them on most of the stuff anyway. The only thing we'd probably agree on is Medicare for all and paid family leave, and I'd say and maybe public transport, and that's that kind of thing. Like I think that's where the agreements with me and them. So
those are some pretty big ticket items there, Anthony. That's not enough. Are you a single issue voter?
Not the only thing. No, it's not the only things though. You got all kinds of foreign policy, civil liberties, the national security state. I think the national security state is the real sticker for me.
Yeah.
Which, DHS, CIA, FBI.
Yeah, I mean, I did ask, and I point people to the full interview. I did ask her some questions about the vote for the 40 billion, and people can tell me what they thought about her answers there. But I did sense a tension between, kind of the squad members' behavior. It feels to me almost unfair to these candidates because the squad members are setting them up for failure. They're having to respond to what the squad members are doing and the ways the squad members have disappointed us. At the same time, they have relationships with these people and are some of their few supporters in all of Congress. Although, as Nina Turner found out, not full supporters, because at the end of the day, the Congressional Progressive Caucus came out for her opponent and nobody broke ranks to endorse her except for AOC in the 11th hour.
Yeah, well, the last thing I'd say is I just can't pity. So it's like, oh, I'm a different Democrat and look what they're doing to me. Well, no kidding. So, I mean, I can't feel bad for someone in that position. But all right. I mean, they're probably not going to win. I don't think anyone's going to win. That's why, people say electoralism is not the answer. I just like to be like aware of the who's in there. Even if I didn't vote for them, they're in there, and just watch them like a hawk once they're.
Ooh. Sorry, I'm getting a call. That's very poorly timed. So let me ask you this one last question, Anthony. How do you feel about, let's say, some of the progressive victories of the last week, Summerlee, John Fetterman? Do you look at that and say, yes, I'm glad that happened? Are you indifferent? And if you're glad that happened, what does that make you feel about your own personal investment in electoral outcomes?
Well, I don't live in their states, so I'm not familiar with them whatsoever, but they don't, I mean, what are they? The John Fetterman guy, his biggest thing is like weed, and you put a gay flag outside his office and weed, and that's all I can think of having heard of him. And Summer, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with her, but good for them, and I hope that they do good things, but I feel like they're going to be on Team Nancy. So,
Anthony, thank you for that. Can you tell me before you leave where you're calling in from?
Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit, Michigan. All right. Thank you, Anthony from Detroit. I appreciate you calling in. Andrew, you're up next. Unmute yourself and let me know what's on your mind.
Hey, Brianna, how are you doing?
I'm doing well this evening. How are you?
I'm good. It just started pouring rain, and I just fixed this roof right outside my door
Oh, well
like a
done.
week ago, so I'm very happy I did.
Well done. I can hear it a little bit in the background. It's kind of soothing.
Yeah, it's calmed down a little bit now. It might put me to sleep after this call, but I had some coffee a bit ago, so probably not.
All right, Andrew, what did you think about it all, or anything else that's on your mind this evening?
I will say, well, first, I guess I'll say I appreciated you were a little sharper with Amy than I thought Katie was. I do still appreciate both of you doing these interviews because I think they can be good illustrations. So that's the first thing I'll say. But I guess like for all these people who are saying like, well, if the Democratic Party screws me over, then we'll see what happens, or maybe they'll consider a third party run. I guess I would consider that like their own personal political journey because I think we have plenty of data, plenty of evidence to show that if you are going to threaten the gravy train, if you are going to make any threats on militarism, or if you're going to make any threats on, monopoly rent from, say, insurance companies or whatever domestically, they will close ranks against you. I also feel though like I still have a little bit of a soft spot for somebody like Shahid Buttar.
Mm-hmm.
I just think like Shahid's own history, knowledge, just the way he speaks about things, like it seems like, I don't know, even a few years ago, Ro Khanna, as you illustrated, was taking a very different position on the kind of neo-Nazi factions in Ukraine, for instance, and had a good take then. Maybe he's considering broader political ambitions now, so he's kind of shaping up a little bit more to the party line. Mm-hmm. So maybe I could still be wrong about Shahid, but I guess in general, I feel like if this is real, if we're really gonna, I mean, we're really talking about where to spend time and resources. So if people are going to invest in electoralism, which I don't think is a total waste of time, it seems like we have to look at it on different timescales. Like if you're thinking I have to win this election right now, then I guess, yeah, you might have to run with the Democrats, or maybe in some states you could run with the Green Party, although maybe not. But I feel like it comes down to like, are we gonna have patience for 8 more years of the same as the last 6 or 7 years, which is basically some people with a good platform trying to run in the Democratic Party and running up against obstacles that make it impossible for them to get in? I guess I'm not really down. And I think if you think back to like some interviews Richard Wolff has done talking about how there are not necessarily governing, although in some cases, yes, communist and socialist parties in Europe, they are able to gain concessions and pull the other parties to the left. So maybe if we do have some more half decent people in the Democratic Party, that could be worthwhile. But it seems like maybe that won't be worthwhile until there's kind of an outside force pulling them to the side. I also should mention I'm originally from Seattle, so I have the example of Shama Sawant there, who has gotten really good. She's gotten like tenants' rights. She's gotten the minimum wage that scales a little bit with inflation. Maybe it's not, it's not sufficient, but that's one person playing that whole city council. And there are some Democrats on the council there that people would definitely consider progressive and say lots of nice things. But at the same time, all of those Democrats that, call themselves progressives and don't have the national party apparatus pushing back against them, they also all supported the recall campaign against Shama. And I think they sorry, go ahead.
No. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead and finish.
No, I was talking forever. I should shut up. And I like the back and forth.
So here's my question to you. I totally hear you on, who wants to go through the 4 or 8 year cycles of progressives who win and disappoint. But if I can steel man this, what a person still invested in electoralism would say, which I think is still probably the majority of people and even the majority of leftists to some degree or another, even if they're frustrated, would say, okay, but what's the plan? What's the timeline that's shorter than that for us pivoting to an alternative, given all the barriers to third party entry and all of that? Isn't it necessary to continue to invest as long as this at the same time that we're building these other structures. And this is what I was talking to Shama and Chris Hedges about last fall when they were both on Bad Faith podcast at the same time. And I asked them, okay, well, do you think that people should divest from electoralism? I wasn't fishing for an answer. I'm happy with yes, I'm happy with no. I have been very open about my ambivalence about all of this on the show. And they said no to that. And I said, okay, well, then what does that investment in electoralism look like? And they were like, well, it's not about electoralism. And I'm like, yes, sure, totally. But there's an election coming up, and what should people do? Should they not vote? Should they vote third party? Should they vote for the better of the two candidates? Should they, should they withhold their votes to make a political grandstand of it so that they can get some concessions out of voting for the neoliberal or the progressive, in quotation marks, the way the first caller spoke derisively of progressives? What to do there? And so I'm maybe it's not fair to put a question to you that was a difficult question for even Shama and because that just to wrestle with. But I wonder what you make of all of that.
I guess I would say that I'm also sort of in the same position as you, although I guess I'm kind of in a both and thought. Like if we put ourselves drop a marker on a timeline and it's 3 months before an election, then I guess, yeah, there are some things that we could consider about for that election cycle without the presence of a third party. But living in Mexico has kind of changed my mind a little bit back more in the favor of electoralism than it was just a year ago.
How so?
Well, just seeing, so for instance, Morena is the party that has been governing Mexico with AMLO as the more notable figure from Morena. They've been in power since 2019. From start to winning the presidency and the majority of the seats in Congress, from before the party was even registered with the electoral commission here, it was 6 years. So that's one presidential election and one midterm election. And I think that that's a very worthwhile amount of time to wait. I think that shortening our sights and peripheral vision to the next election cycle, although that I know that's not what you're saying we should do. I know that you're advocating a variety of strategies, and I appreciate that. But I think that seeing that and seeing what the party's been able to do, for instance, they've kept out like Monsanto, Bayer, GMO type seeds from eradicating the small farmers in Mexico the same way they did in the US and the same way they are doing in India. For example, if you check out Vandana Shiva, she was an interview on Chris, all deleted now thanks to the new Cold War. They've also they tried just recently to nationalize the entire energy sector again. Some of it was kind of privatized in around 2013, I believe. They tried to renationalize that, and when that failed to pass because it needed a larger, like a super majority of votes to do it, they didn't quite have that. The very next day, they nationalized all of the lithium reserves in Mexico. They're talking about, AMLO just publicly he often criticizes the U.S. policies in Latin America, and he and a number of other Latin American countries, but especially prominently Mexico, kind of said they're going to boycott the upcoming Summit of the Americas because the U.S. refuses to invite Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela. So they're building high-speed electric rail all over the country. They're upping the energy production internally. They're trying to get back to like domestic food sovereignty. I mean, they're doing all these things that are policies
Mexico.
that I'm strongly in favor. Yeah, it's like, wow.
Okay, I see you, Mexico. Sounds like we need a good Mexico guest. Although Andrew, you're giving us a good lay of the land. You're an expert in of itself from my perspective. Let us know in the comments if there's anyone in particular you think would be good to have on to talk turkey about what's going on down at the southern border. I appreciate you calling in. I'm going to get through some more guests, but thank you for that.
It's solid English.
Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
Sorry,
Andrew?
you were breaking up for a second. I didn't mean to cut in. But
no worries. No worries.
I was just saying, there's people who have already agreed. None of them speak English all that much.
Okay.
So I've been kind of searching around if someone's down to do an interview and subtitle it. But I really think that there's a lot of, I know people from the city I'm in. I don't know a lot of people like from the National Party. I'm sure there's got to be some spokespeople who speak English, but
yeah, we'll figure it out. Subtitles aren't the best format for podcasts.
I
We'll
know.
figure it out. But thank you for calling in, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Bree.
All right, I'm going to read a couple comments off the screen for the people on the YouTube feed. Greg Allen, thank you, says, it seems like there's no room for dissent in the Democrats. Thank you, Bree, for also seeking insight. And Tony Dallas says, is there an organization fighting for empowering third parties in a substantial way? Electoral fusion, ranked choice voting, whatever it is. I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast that however you feel about it, it does seem like the Forward campaign is one of the most visible, most funded efforts outside of obviously all of the ongoing efforts that the Green Party has been making in this regard. Let me know what you think about that, whether you have any optimism about the Forward campaign, whether or not you would be supportive, and what litmus test, if any, would have to exist for that institution for you to want to give money or feel comfortable supporting it and its candidates. P, you were the next caller. Unmute yourself. Oh, before you talk, P, I wanted to talk about what's on the screen really quickly. What the last caller was talking about reminded me that I saw this thread earlier today where someone, Luther Luke Campbell, had tweeted, give me 5 reasons why Black people should vote in the next election. Give me 5 Black promises that have been fulfilled by politicians in the last election. And this predictably set people off. Whenever a Black person suggests that they're not going to vote blue no matter who, we saw this happen to Ice Cube. I have personally experienced this and have experienced it a little bit last week. Over my radar from last Thursday. People go crazy and the neo-lib alarms go off. So Jamel Hill from ESPN, the sports journalist, I think she's at The Atlantic now, wrote, serious question, how will not voting help? Now, this is the familiar rhetorical dance. If you say, hey, politician, do something for my community, especially if you're Black, a bunch of people pipe in and say, well, not voting is certainly not going to get you anything from the community, which completely sidesteps the question. As Luther points out, he says, I never said not to vote. I asked a simple question, my dear. It's a 5 and 5 question. Jamel goes on to say, by not voting, you're creating a lack of accountability for bad politicians, which I pointed out is the opposite of what's true. By voting blue no matter who, you're creating no accountability for politicians. And what we're talking about here in the ongoing conversation on this podcast is how to create that accountability in a 2-party system. Because it does feel, so many people do feel like there's only 2 buttons. And neither of them is especially advantageous. And the psychology behind vote blue no matter who is obvious. It doesn't make people evil to want to at least stem the blood flow, as you're bleeding out, as the country's bleeding out. But that's not sustainable over the long term unless you figure out how to cauterize this wound. So that's why I think this conversation about electoralism and third parties is not going anywhere. P, unmute yourself and let us know what's on your mind.
Hey, I guess along that line, because at a time those kind of things of expressing it like, oh, vote blue no matter who, like it depresses the vote in some sense because you're not taking the concern of the people into consideration. I think with that in mind, my question was, with the Democrats expected to lose the House, is it fair to say that the progressives in the House have endangered progressives and in general Democrats as a whole in not so blue districts, especially like in the recent case of Mondaire Jones, in losing their seats this midterm because they did not withhold their votes in order to force the Democrats to fulfill their promises to improve the material conditions of the working class. So I think the general idea is that the situation that the Democrats and some of the progressives that might lose their seat are in, they're kind of like created as situations for themselves, because if they did fight back, like how you were saying, then even though leadership would be against them, they should like reap some kind of like benefit for the public, so that people don't think that, oh, Democrats are just useless and feckless. So I think the situation that they find themselves in, the progressives and the Democrats, are just what they created.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that they're hurting the brand. I mean, this was a little bit of the conflict of interest that I teed up earlier on in the conversation, that because they feel like there's this loyalty to the elected progressives, they have personal relationships. They were all in these, documentaries together. That I think that it's genuinely difficult. I'm not saying anybody should care, right? I don't, it's not in our business, but I see it when I look at what happened with I don't believe that Cori Bush does not genuinely support and care about S&T, but you look at how that went down. That endorsement battle went down. And so there's that aspect of it. And then the point you're making is I think also accurate, that by ultimately not delivering while they were in office, it's undermined the ability for people who are running for office to claim that they can do anything different, that it is worthwhile for us to invest in them getting into office, because we're never going to have better conditions than we just had. I mean, absent a world where 80% of Congress is progressives, you're never going to get a better situation than we just had, where the margins in the House were so narrow and we had elected enough people that they actually did have the same power as Manchin and Sinema, or Bernie, ostensibly, and declined to use it. So if in that scenario, people weren't willing to use it, and if you aren't, as a prospective candidate, willing to commit on the record to saying you would flex that power and use your leverage to push for a $15 minimum wage to be a part of the COVID relief bill, or, withhold your vote for Nancy Pelosi in exchange for some kinds of concessions. If you're not willing to do that in that circumstance, what is the point when we don't even have the House and you are genuinely ineffectual, the same way that every Democrat will be useless in a minority?
I definitely agree. I think just their lack of courage to stand up it just depresses the vote for progressives and for the Democrats in general. Because if they just took a fighting stance, it's hard with the things that they could, with the threats and whatnot. But then, like, the benefit is that, like, in some sense, you're saving the Democrats because they have to deliver if you're withholding your vote. And I'll end my call here.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for calling in, P. I appreciate it. I think you made a great point. Eric Gray, cousin Eric, welcome back to the pod. What's on your mind this evening?
Dear God. We're still talking about this.
We are, cousin Eric. Do you have anything specific to say about the episode, the interview, or anything else that's been happening on the internet?
I mean, about the interview, it feels like the others. It's just like you're still in this party though. It still feels like that again. So yeah, it's just we're still doing this about being doing this thing with the Democratic Party and everything. Like, these aren't bad people. It's just you just don't want people to be co-opted by something.
And you think that's an ultimate eventuality, no matter what, if you are operating as a Democrat?
Yeah, either you co-opt or you're destroyed. That's it. Really, until like people get to the point of just being like totally sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you'll start to see real like shit pop off. Because between this baby formula shortage that's been going on for months now, and gas prices going up, family budgets getting tighter, bullshit at work, bullshit at home. After a while, you're only human.
Yeah.
Your bullshit meter can only take so much.
Yeah.
And when we talk about this like electoralism stuff, I tell people, look, I like to make that distinction about like the I think I said on here before too about the anti-capitalist left, like just making that distinction known. So when people think in context of the left, what do most laymen think? They typically think liberal. And the liberal class, liberals are not actually left though. If anything, at best, you're center right. So, and this was a conversation in the chat of that premiere. It's like, at some point, you got to differentiate yourself from those people in some type of way, either you determine the label or someone else will.
Yeah. Well, Eric, hold on for a second. I see Nick from RBN is in the queue. Nick, I'm inviting you to be a speaker up here with me. If you want to accept, I want you to have an ability to respond to folks as well. I know that you just finished a great stream. I was listening to it about your debate with Vosh, but you were addressing some of these subjects. And so I wanted to invite you in because I know you've been really leading the charge on these kinds of conversations. How are you tonight?
Doing good. Doing good. Hopefully it's not too loud because I'm doing some driving. I'll just jump in when I had a chance. But yeah, there's a lot of great things that have been said in this conversation. A lot I want to add. I'll let the conversation continue and I can add some more. But yeah, like these are important conversations to have because like there's so many people on the left. I think they're lacking revolutionary discipline, and that's like the main message that's coming from RBN. And a lot of people just think I'm just being mean to like Bernie Sanders and the squad, but there's no one who was a bigger supporter of them than I was when I literally quit my job, like quit my job and canvassed for Bernie Sanders in multiple states. So it doesn't give me any pleasure. A lot of people think I'm like some sort of secret right winger or whatever, but I did more for this movement than most people have. It just I've seen where this direction leads to it, and for a lot of us, it's like not just some theoretical debate. It's we either have a strong left, or people will continue to be left behind and die. Like, and that's why we kind of have the work we do. And I'll pass it back to the floor. I don't want to take too much time.
No, I appreciate that, Nick.
It's always good. Talk to you, Bree. Go ahead.
I appreciate that. Feel free to hop in whenever, no pressure. And also people who aren't already familiar with Nick and Revolutionary Blackout Network, please subscribe and follow to them. I think they're doing really important work and having really important conversations that are not necessarily.
Also, can I just say?
Yeah.
Oh, can I just plug my Callin too? Make sure you guys subscribe
to
my new Callin Revolutionary Discord. Help me get that off the ground. So yeah, sorry, Bree. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm glad to hear that. So Eric, I appreciate you calling in. I hear your discontent and I share it. Let's get some more people in here. Armchair, what's on your mind? What do you think about the interview? Anything else that's been happening on the internet? Whatever's on your mind this evening. We're just gonna go over here for a few more minutes, and then we're gonna transfer over to the main pre-established 8 o'clock show of the debrief exclusively over on the Callin app.
Hey, Bree, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Armchair. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just had a burrito, which was tasty. Anyway, I haven't really had a chance to listen to your interview, so I wouldn't be able to say anything about that. With regards to the overall topic of like how we get, progressive policies passed and what should be our strategy, with regards to, having, trying to get progressives into Congress versus having some kind of a third party. I think, and maybe I'm like, this is going to be a little bit of a downer for folks, but I think that we have to become a little bit more pragmatic, for the lack of a better word, a little bit more realistic about our chances at the moment. I don't think we can achieve sweeping change, which we are envisioning, which, I mean, quite frankly, if you look at, what people on the left, and when I say on the left, progressives on the left, people in this chat at least, if you look at what they want, the things that they want, Medicare for all, free college, et cetera, all those things, they're so far off where the conversation in the mainstream is that it's hard to imagine that a few folks in Congress, the squad of 4 or 5 or even 10 progressives would be able to have any significant influence on, at least until you have just bigger numbers, really.
Well, that's the argument they're making, though, right? Isn't it, Armchair, that to get the bigger numbers, you got to start voting people in. It's not going to all happen like 50 at once. You get some in here, you get some in there for the cycle, 8 next cycle, and you grow momentum.
That's right. Yeah. Well, maybe. Well, I think it's just some people, at least. Maybe I'm misunderstanding some people's position, but certainly some people I see very frustrated at how much progress we're making. And I think some people are sort of giving up really fast, in my view.
Well, the
they're
counter
sort of-
argument, I mean, I think the argument people are making which is why they're, giving up, if that's how you want to characterize it, is that if the people you do get in there are already bending the knee, as it were, before we can even get the next round in 4 years later, 2 years later, then what hope do we have? The comparison that's often drawn is that Nancy Pelosi was a Medicare for All advocate 30 years ago, when she was one of the youngest women ever elected to the House. And, it may or may not be fair to anticipate that AOC would become a Nancy Pelosi. You might disagree with that, but that's the argument that people make. There are people who, point to how the CBC endorsement, I think, was a final straw for a lot of people, because it showed how even folks with intimate ties who are very close to their lived experience of living in their cars and having this activist experience were willing to at least be silent and not come to the defense of a genuine friend and ally at a moment when she needed it, and when the progressive institution in the House was willing to ally against her and for her corporate opponent. So what do you think about this argument that what's the point if candidates spoil in 1 or 2 years, what hope is there that you can ever elect enough when it will take, 20, 30, whatever years to get numbers?
I think that's a fair way to push back on what I said, but my answer to that would be, what's the alternative? Because what I'm seeing as, from people who are getting fed up with this, very slow and painful and disappointing process of, seeing all these progressives not do as well as they want them to do. What I'm seeing, the alternatives that I'm seeing from them are, well, maybe I'm sure I'm not an expert on third party politics, but so far, the alternatives are not better, really. Like the alternatives, from folks like even, Jimmy Dore, who were supporting, Nick Brana from a party that was, People's, I don't remember the exact name of the party,
The
but
Movement for a People's Party.
Right. Which was, sorry to, offend anybody who is into that, but just complete joke. And
well, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
I think it's only fair to separate Nick Brana, criticisms of Nick Brana and the accusations that have been made against him, and some of the mismanagement.
I'm not talking about accusations. I'm talking about the party's ability.
Sure, that's what I'm getting to. And the mismanagement accusations that have been made against him, from the idea of MPP, because I do think there are a lot of people who really were working hard for MPP in good faith who are very frustrated that it has been tarnished in this way because of potentially 1 or 2 bad actors. And so I hesitate to say, even though I think that all those criticisms are legitimate, I hate the idea that we'll sit here and take licks from a Democratic Party who's disappointed us in 1,000,001 ways since the dawn of time, but use phrase like a third party movement is a joke and can never happen, because just like in many, many movements, there are bad actors and setbacks. I don't know. Something rubs me the wrong way when MPP is getting as much as it deserves it. It seems like an excuse to want to throw your lot back in with the Democratic Party when it has done more ills than we could ever imagine anything we ever did on our own could create. You know what I mean?
Sure. No, I agree with that. I mean, sure. I mean, I can see how you can, it's possible that we can create a better third party. Like even looking at at the Green Party, like how many, like, it's just, there hasn't been any kind of real ability of, like, it really hasn't achieved much in terms of it's running candidates or getting people to getting people into Congress and stuff. So I just it's hard for me to just in terms of the structure of how our government is set up, it's very hard for me to imagine any way a third party could be a more viable solution than slowly but surely increasing the amount of progressives in Congress. It just seems to be a much more tenable alternative.
So what is
That's my
that?
opinion.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
The only thing I was about to add, imagine if the Green Party, and I actually interviewed Renee Johnson. That was literally the first guest we ever had on FHL, RBN, formerly known as FHL. So I gave them a chance to speak. But now imagine if the Green Party had $100 million. Like, there was one quarter that Bernie Sanders raised $40 million. Like, even taking electoral politics out of it, like, wouldn't we be better served as a workers' movement, having $40 million go to mutual aid and strike funds instead of an electoral campaign that literally just gave our information to the DNC? So
I mean,
my
yeah,
point is,
no, I hear you, Nick.
it's about resource management. It's about resource management. So as it is right now, because everyone has, it's funny that they call us nihilists because we don't vote for Democrats, but the people who say there's nothing is possible because we live in this two-party system, aren't they the biggest nihilists? They're saying we can't have better things. And as someone who had revolutionary discipline, I'm like, imagine if we had the organizational capacity and the funds that the Bernie Sanders campaign had out of a real revolutionary discipline movement like the Green Party, Kashama Sawant, and Socialist Alternative. And my biggest thing is there's just not a good strategy among the electoral focused left. In fact, it actually hurts us because we are flushing funds that should go to improving the lives of people and maintaining strikes is going to politicians who don't really care about this.
Yeah,
right?
one of
So I'm gonna give you a chance to speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, Nick, I want to know what you think about this. You know, obviously Andrew Yang came up earlier. Someone in the chat on YouTube said Yang just endorsed a CIA guy for Senate, suggesting that they're not, you know, the litmus test for the party isn't something that they are into. What do you make of the Forward Party? And thank you, Armchair. I'm going to go ahead and pull up another caller. I'm going to skip around a little bit to get a little
Cool, thanks.
diversity. Thank you for calling in. Nick? Yang? Oh, did I lose Nick? Looks like I lost Nick. Okay, Miss Mary, the floor is yours. What's on your mind this evening?
Hi, Brianna. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I love this conversation. I think it's so important. And I want to first off say, like, a little bit of a response to what Armchair was saying is, like, it's not about having a third party or a fourth party, a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth. We need a working class party that is for the proletariat. I mean, that's what we need. And I think about that, like, because I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, as I believe you are too.
Amen, sister.
Yeah. So I think about this, like, a lot. I think about Shama, because the reason I actually joined was because I heard Shama on your show.
I love to hear that. Every time someone says that, I get so excited. I'm trying to picture my sound effects.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really intimidated because I was like, these people are too smart for me at first. But no, I've actually learned a lot. And I like to think that I'm a good enough Marxist to not believe that any of these people, from AOC, Cory Bush, Charles Booker here in Kentucky, and even Shama, like, none of these people are Superman. Like, these are not people, you know, upon the mountain looking down upon the world, you know, waiting to bestow their greatness. Like, there is a decision that they have to make every day, to wake up every day and make the decision to do the right thing by us. And I think about this a lot, especially like when I see, you know, or when we talk about, like, Nancy Pelosi made AOC cry, you know, the threats, like all of these progressives that were threatened and so didn't come to the Medicare March for All and all these different things. And it's like, part of me kind of goes, like, let's just bring this down to, like, the rest, like, the same level as the rest of the world. These people are being, like, workplace bullied, you know, like, and that doesn't mean I don't want them to be held accountable for their actions, but I think, like, we have to be a little realistic about what that pressure has got to be like to be in DC and to be in that environment. So I would love if I ever met Shama, and maybe you could ask her for me the next time you talk to her. Like, I'm interested in knowing, like, to what extent does the fact that she is a member of Socialist Alternative, and I'm not just trying to sit here and plug SA, but like, but everyone should join. Like, she has a different level of accountability because she is part of an organization.
Yeah, so we've talked about that on the show, and she says exactly that. But it's not. That is also not magic. Being part of an organization,
Totally.
I mean, she chooses to be part of the organization and chooses to be accountable to the organization. I think being a part of a community gives you community ties, and it's harder to betray folks and stuff when there's that intimacy level there. But she could also just betray them. You know what I mean? Like, it has a lot to do with her personal choices as well. So I think that there are structural things that help, but there's no pure structural fix. The real structural problem is that the progressives feel as though, and to some extent don't have, a layer of protection that the Democratic Party ostensibly gives, or at least enough to stand up against their threats. And this is, part of what I was saying to Amy. You guys need to trust us. And maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it won't work. Maybe we can't really protect you. I don't know. No one's ever really tried, but you got to do the trust fall into the left. Come on left media, form these kinds of relationships. Trust that if someone tries to throw you under the bus, or Nancy Pelosi threatens you, or whatever it is, that we will come to your defense, and we will publicize that, and we will unite with the united power of left media, which is really something when we are in fact united. It hasn't happened in a very long time, but we are perfectly able to get some message out and start things trending and such. Trust us to have your back, and don't capitulate to the fight. When AOC is crying because of whatever Pelosi said, I don't think that AOC is some simpy wimp. You know what I mean? I don't think she's unreasonable. No, I want to know what made her cry. I want to know, because I bet it's something that is worthwhile for us to hear about, and would frankly endear her to us again and make us feel protected, the way that a lot of leftists who I think were checked out of electoral politics got upset again when all that dark money started to be spent against S&T and some of these other candidates.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, none of these people are made of stone. We all have our limits. Mm-hmm. I just and I don't think it's like flipping a switch and it's a magic wand, but I gotta think it's better than this, or at least let's try it. I don't know. Yeah, this ain't working for sure.
Yeah, I hear you, Miss Mary. Thank you for calling in. I'm going to try to get one more in before we go over to the call-in only stream on that. But I hope everybody here in the call-in group just hops over to the stream that starts at 8:00 on Callin. Nullified, you are up. Let us know what's on your mind this evening. Oh, before you talk, I'm going to read these questions from the chat on YouTube. Abel says, are there any communist candidates, or is it illegal in Texas to even have communist political parties? I don't see how they could make it illegal even in Texas. Someone in the chat who might know better, I don't know of any, but if you do know better, please weigh in. RJ Raymond, thank you for your donation, says, what he's really asking is, why won't people accept change at a pace that's comfortable for me? Because then I don't have to do anything but vote. That's in reference to an earlier caller. I don't know if that's the most charitable reading, but I do understand the frustrations of folks that say we just don't have the timeline to wait for successful electoral cycles to get to the numbers that you would need to actually change things meaningfully. Nullified, what do you make of all of this, or what else is on your mind this evening?
Firstly, thanks for calling on me, but I wanted to say, also, I'm just curious.
Nullified, you're super choppy for me. I don't know if that's the case for everybody else. Nullified, I cannot quite hear you, but please try again on the other stream, and I will call you up again. And we'll see if we can work that out. But I want to get one last person in here. Jabari, what's on your mind this evening? Unmute yourself and let us know.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
I can. What's on your mind tonight, Jabari?
Wow. First time caller, long time listener.
I thought so. I was looking for a new avatar that I hadn't seen before. Welcome.
I was really surprised. Yeah. I just want to say first, I want to give you a little like encouragement. You have such an incredible like way of interviewing, pressing, like not letting people like skate around the questions you ask them. It's really a unique or like a very rare group of like subset of skills that you have. And I know I don't want you to feel like you're alone. I listen to you sometimes and I feel like she must feel like she's the only person that sees these things or like says these things. But I want you to know that you're not. You really inspire me just in general.
Well, that's very
So
sweet
just
of
keep
you
doing
to
the great
say.
work that you're doing. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Did you have any questions or comments for the crowd tonight before we wrap?
Well, yeah. I hear a lot of like our discourse is so all over the place. I feel like we kind of need to go back to the roots of like defining what these terms mean that we use. Like I hear a lot of people throw around terms like the authoritarian left. And I'm like, that's like hypocritical. Like being an authoritarian isn't a left leaning concept. You know what I mean? But it just adds to breed all this like confusion and really to stop any sort of meaningful coalition building that we could potentially achieve because people are fighting about what they think they are. If that makes sense.
No, I hear that. And I do, I joke sometimes I don't read books. I don't read books because I don't want all these words and labels in my head that could be potentially alienating for people. And, look, I got in a lot of trouble this week because people thought me trying to speak in language that people could hear meant that I was running cover for white supremacists or what have you. And, I personally believe that you should be able to talk to the audience of the most popular cable news show in the United States of America and be heard. Right. I think that that's a real political benefit. If you think, that audience is big enough that maybe they are all white supremacists, that's fine. That's fine. But I think that someone has to figure out how to communicate with them because that's a pretty good chunk of the voter base. And I would prefer those white supremacists not vote in favor of white supremacy and policies and outcomes that are going to hurt my community. So that's all to say that I think that you're onto something there with the labels. And I think we should have more PragerU style videos, the Grail Gang or whatever to help people understand and get on the same page. But also it means leftists going into conservative spaces and talking to them because they are conflating a whole lot of categories and many of them don't know that the left even exists. And that's why this kind of right-wing populism is really attractive for folks because there are some core truths there and they don't see anybody else talking about that because they see an undifferentiated left full of a bunch of libs who are contemptible for all the reasons we think are contemptible. And they don't understand that there's a faction there that meets their needs without engaging with some of the other more toxic aspects of the right-wing agenda. So thank you for calling in, Jabari. We're going to continue this conversation over on the 8:00 Callin feed. I'm going to read a couple of these comments off the YouTube before I wrap up. Sean DeStefano says, love you, Bree. The left has too many litmus tests on social justice issues and not economic issues, which brings down the left. Would love to see you on a convention stage, I suppose. I did do Politicon a couple of years ago during the campaign. Not sure what's going on with that stuff during COVID, but I'd be more than happy to. Thank you for that donation. And oops, where's that last one? I got to read because it's a big boy. Very generous of you. Thank you, spoiler candidate. Thoughts on a third party where the party platform is no platform and candidates run strictly as independents. The party would function as a debate network for everyone within the party. There could be leftists in one state and libertarians elsewhere. I think that's what, and we can have Andrew back on to talk about it, but I think that's what the Ford Party is doing, that it's going to be a big tent that has basically as its objectives, fighting for ranked choice voting and ballot access. But in terms of actual political agendas is open and neutral and would have libertarians and leftists, whomever else wanted to be on it. I think that at very least there should be, and that for the leftists to really buy in, there should be a no corporate money standard. But I want to know what you guys think about that. Is that an unfair litmus test? What, if any, litmus test would be required for you to support the Forward Party or candidates that are running under a Forward Party banner? We're already late over on the Callin show, and I'm hoping to have a few bites of dinner in between, which isn't going to happen. So follow everybody on Callin. Follow me over there. I'm going to end the broadcast here on YouTube. Again, you can listen to the full episode of our Monday episode and all of our back Monday episodes at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video. We're going to try to do this more often. I always forget to stream. I know people like to stream. I'm going to try to stream more. Thank you. And I'll see you over on Callin in a second. Keep the faith.